Hello, and welcome to Sobercast. We provide AA speaker meetings and workshops in a podcast format. We are an ad-free podcast, and if you enjoy listening, please help us be self-supporting by visiting Sobercast.com, look for the donate link, and drop $1 or $2 into the virtual basket. Also, if you're a member of NA or have friends that are, please tell them about our other podcast, NAPOD. NAPOD features NA speakers and workshops in the same format as Sobercast. We upload a new speaker every day, and it's easy to subscribe by searching for NAPOD, N-A-P-O-D, all one word, on any podcast player app, or go to napod.xyz if you'd like to listen online. Hope you enjoy the podcast and have a great day.
My name's Frank. I'm an alcoholic. Tom, I want to thank you personally and whatever committee you had that got this together for asking my wife Kathy and I to come up and share. We've been privileged to be in this audience for, I think, about the last 7 years, and have enjoyed many of the stories that have been shared from this podium. But this is a little special. There's a lot of ways, my friends, on doing 12-step work in Alcoholics Anonymous. The day my friend Tom called me, I had just gotten some news that I was finding it pretty difficult to accept and to swallow. And I hurriedly looked at the calendar and figured in my mind what they had told me that I was going to be involved in and whether or not it was possible to make a commitment. And something inside that tells us what to do when we need something inside to tell us what to do said, accept it. And I said, we'll be very honored and very grateful to be the speakers this fall at Lake Yale. And Tom, I want you to know, you'll never know how many times in the last almost 12 weeks making that commitment made that day in my life easier and gave me some purpose in my life and kept the attitude the way you all have tried to teach me of gratitude. I don't know how many thousand talks I made in that 12 weeks, but I made a bunch of them. And I made several today. And I'll probably make several tonight. And one of my friends that I love dearly here this morning said, Frank, we're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say tonight. And I said, so am I. And I still am. And Tom shared his experience and his heart with me last night and with you and my lovely wife. That lady shared her life this morning, and now you're privileging me to share part of me with you, and it's not always easy because I wasn't a very pretty drunk. And I didn't do very pretty things, and my drunken story is not funny. But a life of sobriety that you have given me is up through this very instant unbelievable. I told the fellows sitting on the podium if they wanted to go down and evacuate the ship and sit in the audience, they could. You did a grand job. And we do belong to the Easy Does It group in Avon Park. And before that, I was a member in good standing of the Serenities of, I'll get the name right in a minute, Shamrock Group in St. Augustine for almost 15 years. And before that, a place that Charlie and I spent some time together up on outside of Deal, Maryland, and it was called Tracy's Landing. And it was called the Tracy's Landing Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. How many of us in this room tonight has never been here before? Would you show me? Hold your hands up and hold them up a minute so everybody can look around and look at you. And if one of you folks has been here a while, after this meeting, make sure these folks that held their hand up get to meet you. Give them the same privilege that you and I had. My friend Patsy just told me coming in, it's a little trashy, but Patsy and I understand each other. She said a friend of hers came down from Boston and came down here to Florida, and he said, you all really got something going down there. She said, yeah, we got a lot of fellowship. He said, fellowship up in Boston, we call what you all do sex. Thank you, Patsy. I love you. This is a fellowship of men and women that share our experience and our strength and our hope with each other, and so that you won't spend an hour worrying and feeling sorry for me. Let me tell you some good news. And I didn't have anything to do with it. I just showed up. And they tell me that the cancers that I had or the tumors that I had are gone. And if I continue doing the way I'm doing, I'm going to be just fine. And it kind of looks like Kathy and you are. And it's not very funny, but it's true. And then I had a female doctor, and when she made that kind of an examination that they make, I think they call it a rectal exam, and she's a Filipino lady. And she said, Mr. Kidd, I can't believe it. And this organ that she was examining has got two sides on it, and she'd examined one side, and she said, I can't believe it. And she examined the other side of it, and she said, it's a miracle. And I said, well, tell me what you're talking about. And she said, the tumors are gone. Years ago, right after Kathy and I were privileged to be married, we went down to Occoquan, Virginia, to a hospital that's funded by the District of Columbia, and met a doctor, and his name was Dr. Travis. And we had gone down there because one of our kids, or one of our pigeons, or one of our babies, or whatever words you want to call for those people that God permits us to touch their lives, we found was a manic depressant and was taking Librium, and I knew absolutely nothing about it, and we went to the man that was administering the drug to find out about it, and we were ushered into this huge office. And he had a huge desk almost as large as a ping pong table. And on this desk where we were seated facing us, or where the patient would be seated, there was a sign. And what that sign said is, I'd like to talk about tonight. And I've never talked like this before. And I may never talk like this again. But on that sign facing you, as you were seated at that doctor's desk looking at him, instead of his name embossed in gold as it could have been, on this sign it said, expect a miracle. And after he had explained the drug lithium and manic depressivism, which was the reason we came down there, I asked him why this sign. He said, Frank, we treat alcoholics here, and that's what it takes to effect a recovery in an alcoholic, a miracle. And whether you believe it or not, from where I'm standing tonight, I am privileged to look at a room full of miracles. And I salute you. I salute your love and your patience and your understanding, your compassion, your giving, expecting absolutely nothing in return, because you see, I hated you in the beginning. My friend Charlie, that has been my friend for longer than we want to talk about, and I were talking before the meeting, and I was drugged to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous the first time I came in March of 1952 in Falls Church, Virginia. The first meeting was at Boston over the firehouse. The second meeting, the second night, was at Falls Church, Virginia, and the man that drugged me to these meetings was the man that brought AA to Washington, Bill A. And I didn't think I belonged here. And I have a man seated on the podium that celebrated 15 years Tuesday, and he's only 33 years old. And I have another man seated on the podium with 6 years of sobriety, and he's only 33. I don't know how old Bruce is, but he's young enough to smile like that. And I got another wild Indian up here that I love like a brother, that ain't drinking no liquor, and every day he and I meet, we say we're making a liar out of somebody. And that's Alcoholics Anonymous. But I had become a drunk. And I was 32 years old. And I had hair, and I had teeth. And I didn't wear glasses. And I still had 2 cars. I didn't own them, but I had them. And had a new house. And had a couple of kids and a wife. And I still had a job. And I didn't belong here, because I said I didn't. And I went to your meetings for 6 months. And I sat in your meetings in the back row. And I never opened my mouth. And I missed the meeting, and I came back to the next meeting. They said, "Congratulations, Frank." I said, "For what?" They said, "We made you secretary of the Falls Church group." March of 52. And right away I started feeling like I'd started to grow some wings. And old John A. said, "Frank, if we don't like what you do, we'll get rid of you the same way that we put you in here." And I didn't like him either. And I went to my boss with the Acacia Life Insurance Company, and I said, "Mr. Barbeau, you don't have to worry anymore about me. I've joined a thing called Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'll be sober and on the job every day." And he jumped back at me like I had bubonic plague. And a normal, brand new, dry alcoholic with no sponsor, no program, did the only normal thing. I quit. The best job I ever had in my life, because it hurt my feelings. And I went and borrowed some money from my daddy. And I went down on Chesapeake Bay and bought a little tiny country store. And I mean, it was a tiny country store. It had kerosene lights and a potbelly stove. And it smelled like fish that was in the barrels. And I set out to become a millionaire. And I resigned from Alcoholics Anonymous. And I had an old-fashioned phone booth. Those big kind that sat over in the corner with the accordion hinges that were in the door. And I found out later why they put accordion hinges in the door. So when the drunk got in there and passed out, they could pull the wire out from the top and open the door. That happened to me. That's how I found out. In my own phone booth. I've had some good instructors. A word Patsy used so reverently this morning. An instructor is only as good as the student will let him be. And unless the student's willing, the instructor can't do much. And that was the story of most of my life. I was going to run my own life and run my own show, and it almost killed me. That's my story. And you loved me in spite of it. You knew I hated you. You knew I despised you. You knew I cursed you. I laughed at Alcoholics Anonymous every way I could. And for 10 years and 3 months, I didn't touch a drop. I had transferred the obsession for booze over to a dollar bill. And I wanted to become a big wheel. And my God is real sharp. He gave me a sponsor about 17 years ago named Julian that taught me what little dogs do to big wheels, and I didn't want to be a big wheel no more. But March of 1952 is not my sober date. I have one. And it's probably the most important date in my entire life. It's the last Saturday of February of 1966 when I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous. Because after 10 years of not drinking any liquor and not going to any meetings, I showed up a few times. But I was not a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because I said I wasn't. One day in the middle of Chesapeake Bay, I picked up a drink out of a vodka bottle, and I won't drag the story out. But for those whole 10 years, I had in the back of my mind where an alcoholic thinks when he wants to drink. There was a thought, when I got everything in my life just right, that Frank was going to go back and be a social drinker. In those days, Esquire was an important magazine. And it had a picture of a very affluent man standing in front of a big fireplace with a polar bear rug. And a nice-looking lady draped on his arm, and he was sniffing a glass of this brandy. I can't even pronounce it, but I was going to go back and be that man. I never had been that, but I was going to go back and be that. And few that are in the room tonight, and I hope there's none here, but chances are there are, that there's a man or a lady here that still thinks they got a reservation on another drink. Please hear my little ditty out. And you might not want to drink tonight. And if you don't want to drink and don't drink tonight, you've got a chance tomorrow. And it's that simple. I wasn't making money fast enough in the little country grocery store, so the alcoholic tendency of wanting to do something big took over, and I decided I was going to build a marina. I didn't know anything about one, but I was going to build the largest marina on Chesapeake Bay. And guess what? I choose to feel He lets us do what we want to do. He gives us a free will. And I built the marina. And I became the big wheel. And I became Mr. Captain Kidd of Chesapeake Bay. My name was Kidd, and I was a captain in the Air Force in World War II. That's a lie, but I told it so much I believed it. I was the leading ace on the European theater. The only reason Richard Petty got to drive race cars was because I got pneumonia, and his daddy asked Richard to drive. And I drove the unlimited hydroplanes for 10 solid years before the Miss Bardall and Miss Budweiser and Miss Miller's High Life. Those are lies. But do you know, in the society that I ran in, no one ever questioned my lie. When you're running with liars, they all lie. And I had become a phony and a liar and a cheat. And I was my own God and my own higher power. And I was sharing at supper with a buddy of mine, Jerry. We were talking about wearing white Stetson hats. And I had become this big wheel with a white Stetson hat and a cigar and brass buttons on a blue serge yachting coat. And the best way I know to describe me in those days, now that I'm sober and look back at it, if you remember Boss Hogg on the Dukes of Hazzard, that was me. And I did not have any male friends. And I didn't know why, and furthermore, I said I didn't care. My daddy, who was living in Washington, D.C., came down over the hill in D.O., Maryland, and said, "Happy birthday, son." And I thought my dad was getting senile. This was in March, and my birthday is in July. And I said, "You sure you're not mixed up?" "No, my son has been sober 10 years. My father remembered it, but has long since become unimportant to me." I think the book says something about when we get wrapped up in self, everything else around us goes to pot. I started to tell you something, and it's important to me. I mentioned the phone booth, and I started to tell you that the second day I got in that little country store, a phone call came. And I didn't know whether I was talking to a man or a lady. I found out it was a lady. And she told me to write a phone number down. And she told me in a manner that I didn't question it. And I wrote it down, and she said, "Your anonymity is protected. But there will come a time in your life you're going to need a friend, and put this phone number down so if and when you need one, call me." And she hung up. 15 years later, that was the lady that Kathy had as a sponsor. That was also the lady when Kathy told me she loved me the first time. I didn't know how to act. I dropped a coffee cup at Tracy's Landing and broke it all to smithereens. And I got in my car and drove to Annapolis, Maryland, and went to see Marty, and she set me down on the floor like a little grandchild. And she sat in a big chair at 11 o'clock at night and talked to me and asked me to tell her what was wrong. She was a child psychologist, Kathy told you this morning. And this woman had known me many, many years. And I told her, "What do I say when a woman says, 'I love you'?" She said, "How do you feel about her?" I said, "Same way." She said, "That's easy. Just say, 'Thank you, me too.' Keep it simple, stupid." So for 18 years, this lady and I have been privileged to hold hands after an AA meeting and pray the Lord's Prayer together. And if you choose to look, you'd see her lips move and my lips move. And what she's saying is, "I love you," and I say, "Thank you, me too." If something works, don't fix it. I took a drink. I did exactly what the members of the Falls Church Group and the Washington AA and the Baltimore AA that used to drive down and see me and beg me to come back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And they proceeded to tell me what was going to happen, and I cussed them too. Over this whole 10 years, they never ceased to come down to let me know that they were there. And they got cursed every time and told to get out of my place of business and leave me alone. And they kept coming anyhow. That's why it's one of the reasons it's hard for me to stand here tonight and tell you I love you. Because I do, and it's awful hard for you to believe it. But you loved me in spite of me. And you knew what alcoholism was because you'd had it. And when I took that drink, the things that started happening with me for the next 4 years of my life, they were not strange things because you'd already won me. They were horrible. That drink caused me to try to kill my oldest son. That drink cost me the love and respect of 5 children. That drink caused me to lose the love and respect of a mother and father. And that drink caused me to lose whatever self-respect that I had or ever hoped to have. And I couldn't quit. I slipped and slid in Alcoholics Anonymous for 4 years and used to get in the car and drive all the way to the Eastern Shore of Maryland. Still trying to lie. Still trying to cheat. Would come to your meetings in St. Michael's and Easton and Denton and Cambridge. And would drink a pint of vodka all the way back home across the Chesapeake Bridge and down to Deal. And tomorrow morning I was going to start. 4 years. The hardest thing I ever tried to do in my life was quit drinking without help. And I was a miserable failure. I went 7 times to the Annapolis General Hospital. I know what it is to have labeled in indelible ink on a patient chart, hopeless, helpless alcoholism. 7 times to the same place. 7 times to the same doctors, to the same nurses, to the same psychiatrists. And almost 7 times to the same liquor store after I got out, because I didn't know how not to drink liquor. And I came to in a strange place, in an automobile, in the middle of a road. They call it the media strip, you taught me. In a strange town with palm trees and nice-looking people like you going to work with clear eyes. And the sun was coming up, and it was a place called Daytona Beach, Florida. And 2 police officers, one was knocking on one window of the car and the other was knocking on the other. And the one that was on my side of the car looked like that he understood how I felt. I don't know how I knew that, but alcoholics sense it. His attitude seemed like he cared. And this big wheel that had been reduced to a hopeless, helpless wreck, who was huddled in that car, scared to death he was going to die drunk, chooses tonight to feel that what I said was a prayer. And my Father heard. Because I asked that Irish cop if he knew where there was a place called Alcoholics Anonymous, and I meant it. Because I knew you had a solution. And I felt like I had forfeited my right to seek your solution. Because my conscience told me that if you had treated me the way I had treated you all these years, that I'd tell you to don't let the door hit you, you know where. He said, yes, sir, there's a place down the road, a little house, and it's got a sign over it that says AA. I don't really know what goes on there, but I understand it's a place called Alcoholics Anonymous. Would you take me there? He drove my car. His fellow officer drove the police car, and we had a parade to the Almas Club at Daytona Beach, Florida. I still had a bottle of booze between my legs. Normal police officers don't behave the way this pair did, but they did that morning because I took my last drink. with two of them holding me up out of that jug in front of the Almas Club, and gave him the bottle, and they helped me up the steps, and they knocked on the door. And there was a volunteer there that morning. And the door had no windows in it. And when the door was shut, I thought, my God, now that I want them to help save my life, there's nobody there. He knocked on the door, and Blackie opened the door. That was a volunteer in the Almas Club. God bless him. That was his way of saying thank you to you for saving his life. 12-step work. There's about half of this audience in this room that over the years have 12-step me. And my wife. That we have grown to love, that we have grown to cherish. That has helped teach us how to live. And words are just inadequate. I agree with Kathy and I agree with Patsy. We get gushy feelings when we stand up here and come down to ground zero and realize what the grace of God really is. Blackie took one look at me, and he looked at me the way every human being looks at a drunk. But then he did something different. And he taught me something that I've been saying for the last 21 years to a many a drunk. He said, welcome home. And he showed me the story of the prodigal son in action. And I choose to feel that that's what Alcoholics Anonymous is. It's a program of show and tell, where you show me how to live and I want it and you help me get it. They seated me in a wicker chair over in the corner. And two of you were assigned to me as my keepers. And one of you gave me one of his cigarettes, and the other one, by a clock on his wrist, made a statement. And you can't get it any simpler than this. He said, Frank, are you willing to try and go 1 hour without a drink? I said yes. And he didn't leave me. He stayed with me for that hour. And by the wristwatch on his arm at the end of that hour, that man did something that turned my life around. Love isn't love until you can love the unlovable. I didn't need anyone to remind me how I looked and smelled. If there'd been any entrance requirements other than those you have, I would not have been eligible to come here. Had the word honest still been in the entrance requirements, I wouldn't have made it. I think maybe that's what they took it out for some of us. He said, Frank, we're proud of you. Would you be willing to try a second hour? And I did, and I've been trying it ever since, with your help. Another one of you came up to me and you said something that morning I've never heard before, and I've rarely heard it since. And I was beat up and I had scars all over me and I had bruises on me. And he said, Frank, why don't you get out of the ring? I said, but I'm not a fighter. He said, and he said it lovingly. He didn't say it to be smart, because he got my attention. He said, Frank, any of us can look at you and tell you've been in the ring with something and it's beat you almost to death. Why don't you get out of the ring? He didn't mention the steps. That's all he said. And at the end of that second hour, there had been a meeting around some tables up in the other end of the room. And at the end of the meeting, the chairman was saying something that I evidently had never heard in Washington or Baltimore and Falls Church, because I guess I wasn't listening. But they mentioned something about chips. And I know this don't have anything to do with the program Alcoholics Anonymous, but it has something to do with my story. And I don't know whether I twitched or jerked or had a delayed DT or what it was, but the next thing I knew, these two keepers of mine were helping me up, and they propelled me by my armpits up to that chairman, and he gave me this white poker chip. And I didn't bring this here to impress you. I've been carrying this 21 years. We used to live in St. Augustine, and I used to walk the beach and swim in the ocean, and this even went with me in my swimming trunks. Kathy's born on Friday the 13th, and I'm not superstitious. I don't try to run over black cats. But I have never gone anywhere without that chip, because that takes me back to when I was. Y'all told me if I stayed green, I didn't have to get rotten. And you dropped all the fences, because that chip even with my higher power almost 2 solid years. Because you see, I stopped drinking, and I was still doing it. And I went back to Maryland, because there had been twice in my life I'd been in a place on the eastern shore of Maryland called Second Wind. And a man that I grew to love that became a saint to me was named Eugene Brooks, who came down here from New York with his wife Lydia. And they opened a big farmhouse over in the eastern shore, and many of the AAs around Washington and Baltimore used to go over there and visit, and Charlie'd been there, I think. And this man devoted his life to helping people just like me, and I had been there twice as a patient during those 4 years. And the last time I was there, he didn't tell me he knew I was going to get drunk again, but he said, "Frank, if you ever get serious about wanting to learn how to live, come see me." And after 3 days and 3 nights in Daytona Beach and countless chocolate milkshakes with eggs in it that the guys at the Daytona Beach AA bought me out of their pockets and let me stand in front of the men's urinal and do what you know I did with them, they'd pat me on the back and tell me they knew I was getting better, and I knew they was lying. But I got in that automobile, and somehow, miraculously, I drove to that place called Second Wind outside of St. Michael's on the eastern shore. And I said, "Eugene, will you teach me how to live?" He said, "Yes, Frank, I'll teach you. I'll give you a day a week. It's your day. You pick the day, because I can't come to you. You have to come to me." I said, "How long is it going to take?" He said, "You're not ready yet." We made an arrangement, and he said he'd give me Thursday. And for 104 Thursdays in a row, I would leave Deal, Maryland on the western shore, and I'd drive over to the eastern shore across the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, and had to go by 3 liquor stores, and the job was almost unbelievable. But somehow, miraculously, I'd go over there, and I'd come in, and he'd be sitting in a rocking chair, and these boys up here could tell the rest of my story better than me. He's a little bitty tiny man, but a giant of a human being. He would sit in a rocking chair and smoke a pipe and tell me I'd love him, that he loved me, and I'd cuss him. And I try not to curse anymore from the podium, but once in a while I slip. But in those days I couldn't put together a sentence without cursing. I was full of anger and full of hate and full of poor little me's. He said, "I want you to go upstairs and take a nap." "I can't sleep in the daytime." He said, "That's all right, but you won't eat supper." He treated me just like I treat my grandbaby once in a while. And I'd go up and sulk and lay on the bed and sleep. And we'd go to have supper and then go to St. Michael's to a meeting, and I'd sit in the back of the room and look out the window. And when you all stand up and pray the Lord's Prayer, if you choose to, lift I was sitting out in the car. And this went on for 2 years. But miraculously, something was happening. I wasn't drinking. So when you tell me don't drink and go to meetings, I know it works. I didn't think I was getting any better, but I guess I was. And by this time I'd met another man that was important in my life, because I've had a lot of wonderful instructors, even though I wasn't willing to listen. And I'd drive up to Glen Burnie, Maryland, and meet this man that Kathy told you talked at her first meeting, named Bill Burke. And I'd go out and we'd sit on 2 oak tree stumps out in his backyard and drink coffee. And I'd complain about you. And I'd complain about things, because, see, I'd lost that big business. I gave it away. I gave everything away when I picked up that drink. And I'd go on with lament, and he'd say, "Get grateful, you bum." And I'd look at him like he's crazy, and I'd say, "Grateful for what?" He said, "You're breathing, aren't you?" And one time during those 4 years of slipping and sliding, I'd gone to a meeting over at Denton. I said, "This program's not working for me." And one of y'all said, "Why don't you try it not drinking?" And man, I hated him too. And I went to Annapolis one night and I said, "These meetings are repetitious." The fellow says, his name's Boris, God bless him. Old Boris says, "So's breathing." You all are sharp. He don't fool you. God bless you. Get grateful, you bum. I got friends in St. Augustine who dream about it. I got friends in Avon Park that's hearing it. You and I, my friends, have a tremendous responsibility to share what was given to us. No more, no less. For my God, let's keep it simple. Share the love. Share the strength. Share the compassion. First time Kathy and I ever went to Blackstone, Virginia, you scared us to death. We had just been married. You were hugging her and kissing her, and I hated you. And the women were turning around and hugging and kissing me, and she hated them. We hadn't learned how to live. Now we enjoy it, don't we, honey? We just been there with everybody. I never forget the first time Charlie's friend from Richmond, Virginia, is dead and gone. He walked up to me Sunday morning in Blackstone, Virginia, stuck his big paw out and gave me a handshake and a hug and said, "I love you," and I jumped back from him like I had to. Scared me to death. I didn't know how to live. This lady told you about our marriage. I'd like to tell you a few other things before I close. Just a few. On his deathbed, the man that owned that place called Second Wind told me 3 things that I'd like to share. And before I share those, because they're the end of the story, I'd like to share with you, and I try not to curse from here, but I've prayed about it. And the only way I can explain to you my anger and my hate was to duplicate exactly what I said that day after 2 years and a half going over there. I went over there one day, drove over there mad. He was sitting in at his kitchen table and I came in and I said, "When in the goddamn hell am I ever going to get comfortable?" And he understands. He said, "Frank, you never will." Now this was a man that I had grown to love, that I had grown to respect, that I had grown to admire, that I had started to just begin to listen to, and here he was telling me that I would never get comfortable, and he got my attention. He stopped me right in my tracks. I said, your book, I still hadn't called it ours or mine. I said, your book promises me I will. He said, yes, it does. After you do certain things, which you haven't done. I was still 2.5 years into being dry, trying to do it again the same way I had done it for 10 years. And a friend of mine in Vero Beach says after they came back, and the man asked him why he was doing back here at AA, he said, I come back here to try to get sober and stay sober. He said, okay, that's fine. But if you come back here and do it the same way you did the last time, you're going to get the same results and it might kill you. And I looked at that man and I said, what do I have to do? And it's saved my life. That man had had more patience than anyone I've ever known. He had put up with my garbage for 2.5 years. Evidently God had told him that I was looking for an excuse to leave and he wasn't going to give me one. I used to come out, when he'd come out of that meeting in St. Michael's and get in his station wagon and started, I was waiting braced for him to ask me, why didn't you stay for the Lord's Prayer? He never said a word. And I found out something. You can't argue if you don't argue. And you can't fight by yourself too long. And I said, what do I have to do? And that sweet, kind, compassionate man turned into a raving bull. And I couldn't run because I'd asked for it. And he proceeded to do like Kathy's sponsor did lovingly for her. He took my fearless and moral inventory for me, and I'll tell you, it was a mess. And I believe that that was the day that I started to become willing to change. In the story I told you in the beginning that Dr. Travis said, expect a miracle. Because he said it takes a psychic change. And it takes a complete change of personality. And it takes a power greater than oneself to accomplish this recovery from alcoholism. And Eugene Brooks, on his deathbed, when I went to see him, he was dying of pneumonia. And he did. I asked him one question. I said, Eugene, sometime, somewhere, a little drunk's going to ask me how to stay sober. What must I tell him? And just like that, like he had been rehearsing it all his life, he said, Frank, God's going to put you in touch with some pretty sick people. Keep it simple. Don't drink today. Learn to have patience with yourself and other human beings. What's this got to do with staying sober? I've been privileged to learn almost everything. Learn to have patience with myself and other people. And the third thing we're doing here today, tonight, this weekend, you tell him to try to associate with a group of people that understand him. I don't know of any group in the world that understands me any more than you. I'm back on speaking terms with my 5 kids. They don't understand me. Kathy has 6 and they're wonderful and they love her, but they don't understand her. You accept us totally on face value. Period. Julian became my sponsor. And in Blackstone, Virginia, when I asked him to be my sponsor, he said, I got to think about it a little bit. Come on up to my room, we'll talk about it and bring Kathy. And I remember thinking, what's this got to do with you being my sponsor? But I did what he asked. We went up there and sat down on the bed, and he said, well, openers, I'm going to tell you what I see, and then if you like it, I'll be your sponsor. He said, for openers, I see a spoiled, rotten brat that never grew up. And I doubt very much whether you're really honest if you will listen to what I have to tell you anyhow. But if you will, I'll give it a shot. And I swelled up and I hated him. And I didn't answer, and he didn't answer, and we left it open. And I saw him 3 months later in Luray, Virginia. He said, well, Frank, did you ever get a sponsor? I said, yeah, you. And he laughed. He said, you remind me of the fellow that says he's got a family doctor and nobody's ever been to see the doctor but the kids. Well, it's been an amazing relationship. This man says it's a lot harder to learn how to live than it is to make a living. It's a lot harder to live than it is to make a living. This man also is another one of those that says this thing's an inside job. Many of you knew another one. And this lady has also been an instructor for me. Because you see, I started out with this quest of a higher power, doing it wrong. My friend Joe Martin, you all know him as Father Martin, was at Fort Meade one time, and the only time I ever been other than this, I guess, to an AA meeting in a sanctuary. At that time, I had never been in one. And they were painting the officers' club where they were going to have the AA meeting over at Fort Meade that night, and we had to meet in the church. And Joe came up to me and he said, Frank, you know, I've been seeing you've been having an awful lot of trouble with this thing. He said, why don't you make believe you believe in God? I said, Joe, that'd be lying. And this man had known me a long time. He said, Frank, you and I both know you lie better than you do telling the truth. There ain't no wrong way to stay sober. Kathy and I hadn't been married too long, and one day I got exasperated in our kitchen there, and Tracy's laying, and I said, I wish I had more faith. She said, honey, that won't get it. I turned and I looked at her, and she said, just use the faith you got. Maintain an attitude of gratitude. My God, He's been good to me. He's done for me far more than I could have ever done with your help. I came out of a good home and I ruined it. I had a wonderful father. I hated my mother 50 years and through the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Through you people and your example and you're not being ashamed to tell me what I had to do to stay alive. I made my amends to my mother. And my mother passed away knowing her son loved her, and she passed away with her son knowing she loved me. But it was only through the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm all done. I want to thank you for the privilege of sharing a struggle and then a little glimpse of the wonderful world. The privilege of living, not fighting anything or anybody. God bless you.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Sobercast is ad-free, and we'd like your help in order to keep it that way. So if you'd like to help us be self-supporting by pledging $1 to a month, visit Sobercast.com and look for the donate links. Thank you very much.